I'm hoping, Dr. Wagacha, in your research, these are some of the elements that we'll be able to factor in. So this is a nice opportunity for me to call on you now as the person that's driving the forum's research project that will ultimately be published, hopefully within the next 4 to 6 weeks, that captures a lot of the discussions that we've had here, but hopefully serves as some form of, I don't know, policy tool or reference tool for some of the development partners, as well as our own colleagues in the asset owner industry, as well as government more broadly. So, but I'll let you explain that. Over to you.
Excellent. I would like to say hello to everybody, and thank you a great deal for this interaction. All the discussions are pointing out to the fact, the reality that the post-COVID economy will be different. It will be a different kind of economy for which we need to prepare now, where some of the traditional policy mixes and some of the traditional interactions between, for example, institutional investors and policymakers on the macro side will be different. So the mosaic of that post-COVID economy is closer to what His Excellency pointed out. We are in a situation more or less like a third world war. And what it means is the reconstruction that needs to take place has to be thought out early. It's got to be given very strong leadership, and it has to be done with a great deal of bravery. I'm glad to say that the discussions of the last 3 or 4 roundtables have been highly useful in putting together the document that was circulated by Africa Investor. And some of the ideas have been have fertilized the thinking about what we are heading to in this research project, which is basically to collect ideas, synthesize a very influential roadmap report for what the post-COVID economy will look like and what it might mean for a number of areas. And we selected 6 areas, which I'll just go through briefly. And these areas have, to start with, the interaction between institutional investors and the macroeconomic management policymakers. It's clear that the language, for example, of policy mix between fiscal and monetary policy is no longer enough. It wasn't enough even in 2008. We saw that new tools were brought in, for example, quantitative easing. Now, the post-COVID economy needs major interactions between macro policy and institutional investors. I heard Hubert just and a few other people mention briefly about interacting institutional investors with policymakers. For example, the creation of an infrastructure platform. Maybe what needs to be done, as Hubert is saying, is to ensure that you package what might be called like the minimums for infrastructure platforms, and try to ensure that governments understand and we communicate what governments, the minimums that governments need to do to access other investors into their projects. So one area is this interaction between institutional investors and macroeconomic policymakers. The second area is the supply chains and trade support, and in this case, I think Hubert discussed quite in some detail. Perhaps he knows even more than I do. about the importance of driving the Africa Free Trade Area Pact and ensuring that it is put into ICT platforms. You are able to do digital trading and to move the volumes of trade, especially driving important areas like food trade, like small and medium enterprises, and ensuring that that goes on. That area is the major impact that is going to happen with pension funds. This is, as you know, is a demographic kind of divide. Those who have accumulated up to now and then need to decumulate in the years to come might find that the rates of return probably won't be building their returns at the rates that were available, say, 10, 15 years ago. If you happen to be in the accumulation phase, maybe you might lose a job. People have different demographic opportunities. And then we have item 4, which is the change in strategic asset allocations, SAA. The most important opportunity here, and it has been mentioned in a number of interactions, is to build a more resilience and greater sustainability through ESG. ESG comes in to strengthen economies and ensure that we have a sustainable world in the post-COVID economy. The fifth item is capital markets and the beating that they've taken on the African continent, and we need to rethink maybe some of the impacts that are going on, and find whether there are ways in which we can build resilience in capital markets. And finally, we have an idea about the roles in all the 5 areas that we've discussed. The roadmap would give new roles and insights for the role, the sort of interactions with multilateral and bilateral plus private lenders. So you'd have new ideas about how multilateral and bilateral and public and commercial lenders behave towards the post-COVID economy in Africa. And it's quite clear that on the rebound from COVID, it's quite clear that much of the traditional flows to Africa will be limited. So in a sense, what we are discussing about the idea of having infrastructure platforms and areas where sovereign wealth funds and pension funds can find a footing in funding activities in Africa will be critical. So that's as far as we've got with this initiative of the influential roadmap report. And if we get it going, the kind of initiative that we will structure will have a path-breaking document, a path-breaking initiative with a forward, an executive summary, and each section will analyze the largest groundbreaking COVID-19. Each section that I just discussed, each of the 6 areas that I discussed above, will analyze large and groundbreaking impacts in the post-COVID economy. And each section will conclude with a prescribed roadmap and rules and responsibilities for 4 stakeholders. 4 stakeholders. And these stakeholders would be African asset owners, that is sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, which we've discussed extensively today, African governments, African regional banks and development finance institutions, and then the fourth actor would be the international development finance institutions. The roadmap, once done, would be shared with Africa's heads of state and governments, the domestic and global asset owner community, otherwise institutional investors, the private sector, development partners, and development finance organizations. And finally, if this initiative is done and we have the provocative post-COVID concepts in a package, we would have a capacity, perhaps maybe put together by Africa Investor, to follow up implementation and follow-ups and availabilities to governments and regulatory agencies to implement the ideas. To make, not to take too much time, that is the kind of mosaic that we are trying to build, and to see the paths towards reconstruction from what His Excellency mentioned as being virtually a third world war for the African continent. Thank you very much.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.